You are now live on YouTube. I'm changing you to host. The mic is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to American Muslim 360, the number one Islamic broadcast platform in the nation where your intellect is respected and your voice is protected. You're listening to the Internet Stranger podcast. I'm your host, Edward Willis, and I apologize for sounding like Kermit the Frog, but that is just where we're at the moment. So tonight, and we will open with the dua, but I just kind of want to give you a heads up. Tonight, we're going to look at two short videos and then hopefully have a very robust discussion. So let us open with a recitation of Al-Fatiha. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Surat al-Ladina an'amta alayhim Garil Makdubi alayhim Waladolin. Ameen. Thank you for your presence. And let's see if we can get off to a start tonight. So I want to leave us a lot of time for discussion.
Negative consequences a few studies had found that the negative consequences of living with a single mother were smaller for Black children compared. A few A few studies had found that the negative consequences of living with a single mother were smaller for Black children compared to their white.
Seems like she's having trouble with her phone, staying on with that. I can, go ahead and play that for you. Is that okay?
I'm not understanding you.
I can go ahead and play that clip for you. Is that okay?
Can you see it, but I couldn't?
I saw it keeps breaking off. Her phone keeps dropping it, but I can play it.
Okay, go ahead then.
A few studies had found that the negative consequences of living with a single mother were smaller for Black children compared to their white peers. And researchers had speculated that the extended family had a role to play. That is, deeper embeddedness in extended family networks helped to serve as a protective factor for African American children. While I was intrigued by the notion that the extended family could play some sort of compensatory role, I was even more struck by this puzzle that was mentioned only in passing. This was the first time that I had heard that the consequences of single motherhood varied across racial groups. And it countered everything that I had been taught to believe about the role of single motherhood in shaping outcomes within the African American community. It also stood in direct contrast to what I knew about social welfare spending in the US. You see, African Americans have the highest rates of single motherhood, and this deviation from the two parent family is routinely indicted as a fundamental cause of their disadvantaged position in society. And our federal government actually spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year trying to promote the formation and maintenance of the two parent family as a part of a federal strategy to reduce poverty and racial inequality and to improve child outcomes. So naturally, this elicited a lot of questions for me. How could single motherhood be less negatively impactful for Black children, and yet we devote so much time, attention, and taxpayers' dollars trying to reduce it for this group? Does the extended family truly have a role to play in explaining the differential effects of single motherhood? And why had this finding about the disparate impacts of this family form received so little broad attention? Typically, in the literature, it was discussed as an aside, as a footnote or a detour, if you will, on the path to much more important research findings. But I thought that this puzzle deserved far more attention, so I decided to take a detour of my own. A few
Thank you,
studies
Sister Manira.
negative
That
consequences
is, it's just a
of
repeat.
a single
I'm
mother
about to
were
queue up
smaller for.
the second video, which is a longer piece involving the same individual. Sister Manira, are you able to see this one and capture it?
Not yet. Not yet. Can you give me the title of it? I can try to find it if it's the same person.
Yeah, it is the same person. Hold on one second.
Is there a name for that clip?
Yes, is the benefit of a two-parent family a myth?
Okay. Let me grab that.
It is true that when Black children grow up with both parents, they tend to experience advantages, and they do tend to have improved outcomes.
Stop this
It is
particular
also
one,
true, unfortunately.
Munira. Go to the one that is under Amanpour and Company. That's it.
Next, rethinking widely held beliefs about racial inequality. For decades, scholars have drawn a strong link between high rates of single-parent households faced by Black Americans. Well, our next guest is challenging that idea. It's all in her new book, Inherited Inequality. Harvard sociologist Christina Cross joins Michelle Martin to explain how viewing systemic disparity through a different lens could help these disadvantaged Black communities.
Thanks, Christiane. Professor Christina Cross, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, your book is kind of a myth buster, I guess, if I could call it that, because you really challenge some of the things that we have just sort of come to accept as part of kind of social policy or family policy. You say that, you open the book by reflecting on your own childhood in Milwaukee, where the two-parent family was kind of held up as the antidote to all manner of ills like, poverty and crime and so on. And one of the reasons that struck me just to begin with is that I think that there's sort of an attitude that African Americans don't talk about issues like this among themselves. Like this is sort of an outside in conversation. And so the first thing that I noticed was you say that this was kind of a commonly discussed theme in your childhood, at church and your family members. Can you just talk about that very briefly?
Yes. So I, like you mentioned, am from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I grew up in a working class community there. And many times I would hear folks at church, at school, within my neighborhood, sort of trying to grapple with many of the challenges that we were facing and trying to understand what really was driving some of the issues within my community. And often family structure, in particular, single parent families came up as part of the narrative. And a lot of times the story was that our community was better off when we had higher rates of two-parent households, and that unfortunately there had been a change with an increase in single-parent families, which was, among other things, a really important factor in driving some of the challenges we are facing.
But here's where your book takes an interesting turn. You write that Americans have great faith in the power of the family, and in particular, the power of the two-parent family. We imagine this domestic idol to be a haven from the harsh realities of the outside world. And the way we rhapsodic, it's easy to assume that most Americans see the two-parent family as a great equalizer. And you say you were raised to believe in this. And growing up, the adults regularly invoke this family structure as a solution to a host of problems facing our low-income African-American community. So that's the first thing. You say that, look, there's a reason that so many of us continue to hold fast to the idea that, two-parent families are advantageous. It's true. I mean, it's just common sense. But one of the central findings here is that the negative effect of single motherhood on child outcomes is weaker for African-American children than for white children. And the well-being of Black youth from two-parent families is substantially lower than that of their white peers. When is the first time that finding became clear to you?
Well, it was about a decade ago for me when I was working on my dissertation research. Like any good graduate student, I wanted to explore what we already knew about the topic of family structure before designing a project of my own. And one of the things that I found relatively hidden in the data was this striking finding. I had found that several researchers had uncovered that the negative impact of living with a single mother was smaller for African American children. And of course, I was really struck by that, given the conversations that I had been hearing since I was a child, but also what I knew more generally. 80% of white Americans and 70% of Hispanic Americans and 60% of African Americans all agree that African Americans have a harder time getting ahead because of differences in family upbringing, specifically family structure. So this is a consensus or a widely held idea that was at odds with what I was finding in the data, which made me explore more. That finding was about single motherhood. And I began to wonder about the flip side of the coin. What is it like for African American children when they grow up in two-parent families? Do they reap the same rewards?
Do they reap the same reward? So can we take those sort of separately? What's your theory? Why is it that growing up in a single parent household is more damaging to white kids than to Black kids? Why do you think that is?
That actually became the focus of my dissertation research. And I began to test some theories that had already been put out in the world, but they were at that point speculation. There were two in particular that I decided to test. One of them focused on extended families. So we know that in general, African Americans tend to be more deeply embedded in their extended family networks. They're much more likely to live with extended kin or to live close to them, and they engage in significant amounts of support exchange. And one of the theories suggested that African Americans' more deeply embeddedness in this extended family actually served as a protective factor, sort of buffered against some of the negative consequences of single motherhood.
I think kind of anecdotally, a lot of us have seen that. Do you know what I mean? And it also explains the way that sort of legal structures kind of work against Black families. Like, for example, this whole business of people registering their kids in out-of-boundary schools, like schools where they don't live, but maybe their grandparents live. And then you look more closely at it and you think, oh, wait a minute, the grandparents function as another set of parents. Like the grandparents might have the kids Monday through Friday and the parent has the kids on the weekends because that's a better school. And then people look at that and think, oh, you're doing something illegal. But for them, it makes sense. It's normal, right?
Yes, and actually that's one of the things that I have explored in other areas of my research, how some groups just do family differently. And it's much more common for African Americans to involve extended relatives in routine child rearing tasks, and even to share households some of the time or all of the time with these extended relatives. But if we focus so much on the nuclear family, we will miss that. And we can make it actually much harder to support these families.
And you're saying that the corollary to that is that white families, that's less common. It's less common, like the focus really is very much sort of the nuclear family. And that if a single parent doesn't have that, a single white parent doesn't have that, it becomes much harder.
Well, they're much more likely to live further apart from other relatives. And actually in my study, I found that many white single parents reported less satisfaction with the amount of support they were receiving from their extended relatives.
Interesting. Okay, so then let's take it the other way, which is to say that Black kids who live with two parents don't seem to reap the same benefit as white kids who live with two parents. Why is that?
Well, to understand this, I think it's important to understand why living with in a two-parent family is generally beneficial for children in the first place. And it's because parents have more monitoring and time to spend supervising children, but they also have more money on average. So in general, children in two-parent families have access to more resources. Well, unfortunately, one of the things that I found in my data is that Black children who grew up in two-parent families have drastically fewer resources, in particular economic resources, than white children who grew up in the same type of family. Their household incomes are about 60% of that of white two-parent households, and their family wealth is just a quarter, 25%.
Why does that matter? Why does that matter? That the gap in wealth and assets, the money that exists because of, your house or your investments and things like that. Why does that gap matter so much, in your opinion?
Well, wealth matters so much for being able to give people a sense of economic security at any point, but especially during moments of downturn, right? You mentioned the recession earlier. Having wealth can make all the difference in being able to keep your home or not, and it being able to afford to send your children to a quality school, and being able to provide children other advantages as they try to establish their own independent household. There are many parents who offer their children help with down payments to own homes, which of course allows for a greater and earlier accumulation of more wealth. So you can sort of see this compounding advantage from having access to more assets and having higher levels of wealth.
Are any of these findings surprising to you?
Well, yes, actually. It was already concerning to find that Black children from two-parent families had drastically lower academic and labor market opportunities than their white peers. But what I was really struck by, and what I did not expect to find, is that Black children in two-parent families had outcomes that were more similar to their white peers who lived in a single-parent family than to their white peers who grew up with both parents.
Why is that?
Well, it goes back to these resource disparities that I mentioned before in large part. But actually, I found that for some outcomes, economic resources had less to do with what was going on, but things outside the home also come into play. So one thing that I found is that Black children in two-parent families were 2 to 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school than their white peers. And they had very high suspension rates compared to any group. Well, economic resources only explained a small fraction of what was going on there. But what I also found is that when it comes to their behaviors, they were not different with respect to how they showed up in the classroom. But there's been a ton of research to show that Black children's behaviors are often perceived to be more negative and disruptive in a classroom. And so then we think about how perception really plays a role in driving these disparities in school discipline.
So you point out that Black two-parent families are almost invisible in academic literature, even though they make up nearly half of Black families today. Why do you think that is?
That's correct. Well, for so long, the conversation about Black families has been about single parent families. There's been such a concern with trying to figure out why African Americans have a harder time getting ahead on life. And so then the conversation and the attention has been on these single mother families. And so even though there has been a rise in Black two-parent families, that's not where we have been focused on for so long. Narratives are incredibly powerful in sort of directing our attention and shaping the way that we think about issues. And so because that's been just such a long-standing narrative, the narrative about Black single parenthood, I think it has made it difficult for us to really imagine and think about Black two-parent families.
So what do you think has been lost by not spending more time thinking about this Black two-parent family experience?
It leads us to some pretty false assumptions about what's really driving inequality and outcomes for Black children, but also what we can be doing to level the playing field. Because we haven't focused on Black two-parent families, we haven't known how drastic the opportunity gaps are for this group compared to their white peers. It has allowed us to believe for so long that the two-parent family is this great equalizer, which has actually shown up in the way that we craft policy.
What are some of the things that would actually, based on your findings, actually make a difference for families?
So it is true that when Black children grow up with both parents, they tend to experience advantages, and they do tend to have improved outcomes. It is also true, unfortunately, that they still lag behind their white peers in the same family structure. And my findings indicate that much of that has to do with these wide gaps in economic resources. And so if we really want to turn the tide, we need to be thinking about how to bolster family resources instead of making cuts to key social safety net programs like Medicaid and SNAP and Children's Health Insurance Program. We could be thinking about ways to help families to stay afloat during these challenging times by increasing that amount of aid. Another thing that people are really surprised to find out is that TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which we just commonly refer to as welfare, its budget has not increased since it was created in 1996. So nearly 30 years ago. And when we think about inflation since that time, we really start to see that this program is falling behind in the amount of support that it is providing to families, or what we thought was adequate even 30 years ago. So even just thinking about trying to make sure that that funding keeps up with inflation, there's also been different strategies that we've seen that were effective recently that we could have continued. I think about the expansion of the child tax credit during the COVID-19 pandemic and how that lifted tens of millions of children out of poverty. And it really made a difference in increasing economic resources for families. Why can't we continue to do that? We see that it works.
So the bottom line is, you're just saying that living in a two-parent family has significant advantages for white kids. It has advantages for all kids. It particularly advantages white kids. It really doesn't advantage Black kids that much. So if people are not willing to see that, what does that say? If they're not willing to sort of adjust for the difference, what does that say?
Well, if we continue to assume that the benefits of this family structure are universal, we're not going to be able to close these gaps that we say that we care so much about. It will lead to us perpetuating inequalities between children of different races as they have gone on for decades. One of the reasons why I call my book Inherited Inequality is because I want to highlight this unequal access to opportunity that has persisted in the U.S. across generations. And we don't want to continue to pass that on to the next generation.
I'm imagining that some might look at your findings and say that this takes people off the hook, that people should exercise personal responsibility. And that sort of blaming outside forces for your kid's lack of success in school and things of that sort just is unhelpful and kind of perpetuates a sort of a lack of sense of personal responsibility. So what would you say to somebody who made that argument?
Well, the thing about my book is that I'm looking at people who've done it, quote unquote, the right way. They've done what society said we should do in order to guarantee our children's success. And yet they have not found their children in a position to actualize those same dreams of success. Unfortunately, their children don't have access to the same opportunities. So this goes beyond the individual. These are parents who have managed to stay together for decades. I follow children from birth through young adulthood, and they provided a stable home for their children. And after doing what they were told was supposed to guarantee them a bright future for their children, they still have to endure additional barriers. This is not simply about individual responsibility. Individuals, of course, have choice and agency, but they're also facing significant constraints.
Professor Christina Cross, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sister Manira.
You're welcome.
Okay, so as they say on some broadcasts, phone lines are open. And I will start by saying that I had a really wide-ranging discussion about the second video. I didn't discover the initial one, the shorter version, actually until today. But about 20 of us had a very lively discussion about the interview that we just saw. And none of us are, well, there are a couple of people in the group who are psychologists who do marriage and family counseling, but the majority of us are just your average run of the mill, decently educated, trying to keep families together or try to keep families together people, speaking anecdotally. And almost every one of us, this is an entirely African American group, pretty much every one of us had been in situations where our household was kind of responsible for a relative's children for a period of time, either because they were doing something to try to advance, make their lives better for themselves and their children, or they were incapacitated for one reason or another. So I think a lot of people in the African American community are familiar with that particular dynamic. The other thing is that I would say 17 out of the 20 of us that were there grew up in two-parent households. There were two women and one man who experienced either not having the father in the household, during their developmental years, or their father, married or not to their mother, in and out of the household. So most of us came from what would be considered fairly stable family structure, two-parent family, one or both parents worked, church going, whatever. All of the check the boxes on what stability is supposed to look like. And there were varying degrees of success. Now, the part of the reason that we were sitting there talking is that we were all reasonably successful of getting ourselves above water. But every one of us also had siblings and cousins and friends that grew up in similar situations to ours that didn't have the same outcome, or getting to that outcome was delayed by particular actions or decisions and things of that nature. We all came to the agreement, obviously, two-parent families are the best, and that you have to strive for that. We also had to acknowledge that two-parent families are not a panacea for success, that it actually takes the two-parent family as a foundation, but it takes a lot of other stuff happening in the right way to give successful outcomes, especially to younger people that we're trying to help along. And I'll stop with that. And Manira, your hand is up.
Yes, yes, thank you. And assalamu alaikum to you and your radio audience.
Walaikum salam.
This is very interesting. And as I was listening and as you were speaking, I was thinking that we have had a lot of practice in the broader experiences of raising children, going back in our history, from taking care of children collectively on the plantations that we lived in the systems that we came through. I remember in my grade school years, some of my classmates saying that they were looking forward to summer because they go to the South to be with their grandparents during that time. And even in growing up, my mother, there were 6 girls in my mother's family and 1 boy, but they would be on the phone all day. My child did this, my child did this, that happened. And it was nothing for our aunt to say, put her on the phone. you know, and communicate their thoughts to the situation. And by the time it got to another aunt, you had to talk to her, and so forth and so on. And oh, don't let it get to the grandparents, they just might show up. So there was this kind of involvement. Um, one of my friends told me he was such a good child growing up because he lived with a grandmother, an aunt, and his mother. And if he got in trouble once, he got punished 3 times. Okay. So this type of involvement, it was something we had a lot of practice in and with. But what uh, made it one element that made it harder for the two-parent household as well was that our immediate environment, we lost control of it. And that immediate environment was and still is a very heavy and dominant voice for our children that are growing up in that environment. When I was growing up, my neighbor can tell me and set me straight on anything. Any neighbor on my block can say something to me and set me straight. That's not the case anymore. And there's so much bad influence in many of our neighborhoods, uh, and bad media influence and advertisements in our neighborhoods as well. So our environments got away from us, so to speak, where we don't have that control over our environments anymore. And our children can be good in the house and doing everything right. But when they step out that door, and when they log on to those computers, you have so much competing influence for the parents. So this phenomena has to be taken into effect as well. And our educators and teachers, my teachers growing up were African American in East St. Louis. I had maybe two in my classes, 2 or 3 um, teachers that were other than African American, but for the most part, they were African American. And um, they would know your parents, you know? Don't let me call Miss Bernice. Don't let me have Miss Bernice up to the school. Uh, so these people are with our children 8 hours a day, every day, many times more than we are. And is that cultural sensitivity there? So these issues uh, contribute to the external influences outside of the home, even for a two-parent household in this day and time. So the net has to be cast much wider to include the external environment, even in two-parent households, and additionally in single-parent households as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to have a little something to say before I chime in here again? And again, anything that I say, because I've done no research on this, piggybacking off of people like the young lady who just spoke, and my own anecdotal, life of just seeing stuff and being involved in things. So I have 2 sons and a bunch of nieces and nephews, and we've been very fortunate with the children of my brothers and sisters. And I'm really trying to think. I think we have maybe about 20 children amongst the seven of us. We've had 2 that have kind of gone off the deep end. And those 2, if I were to tell you their story, you would understand. So when I think about that, and I try to conjure in my mind, because I tried to do this the other night when we were talking, is why are there, like, in my little sample, why were there really good outcomes for, let's say, 90%? All pretty much except for the ones that had issues. The two-parent family model basically endured until, both of my younger brothers have passed away, but until they passed away, that two-parent model was there for their children. um, One of my sisters only had one child, but she was Jehovah's Witness. He was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. They're very strict on how you spend your time, what you can get into. He's extremely successful, though he's no longer Jehovah's Witness. But he's extremely successful and a fine young man. And I could go on and touch on that. But the two parent model, I want to say, was the foundation on where that was built. And it was, in many of our cases, I would say the five of us younger, my mom and dad, they were like the model of what you would kind of want to a certain extent. My dad worked full time, my mother worked part time, and those part time hours usually coincided from when we were in school till it was time for us to get out of school. So we didn't get a chance, even though we wanted it, we didn't get a chance to run wild in the streets. And as much as I hated that, when I'm in my yard looking at other kids riding their bikes up and down the street, chasing each other, laughing hilariously, and all that kind of thing, running in and out of people's yards, chasing Miss Davis's geese, and all that kind of stuff. As a parent now, I can see how that created a little bit of a mindset that I was never, as a parent, I was never as strict as my parents, but I still had boundaries that I knew were reasonable boundaries. But there are challenges, even as you were saying, Sister Manera, there are challenges even when you have that set up. And I'm going to stop for a minute and let Brother Michael Hameen jump in here. Go ahead, Michael.
Assalamu alaikum to you and to the audience.
Walaikum salam.
Yeah, when I've had to go in and out because of some business I had to take care of. But as I'm listening to this narrative, I'm thinking about how we're challenged by those that want to curate our situation as African Americans, and there are statistical reports. I think blackstatistics.com and more general statistical analysis formats that show the problem with single parent African American homes. And it's clear, in fact, scripturally, and as well as historically, as I heard you mention, the core for proper development and being more able to meet the challenges, the father and mother in the home is more beneficial. I think you can find that scripturally as well as historically. we are a people who have been put under mythology to a great extent to place us in a caste like, or to make us at the bottom of a caste like system, called American life, you know, and it's evident that we have individuals, for various reasons that seek to curate narratives for us, for their own benefit. But how is that information? Look, the problem with Caucasian single parent homes is different because they still have the opportunity to benefit from the white founded or Caucasian founded structure of American life. That's not our reality. Our reality has been dysfunctionality and disruption, and the benefits that you received are a great mercy and blessing from God. In my opinion, and it's proof that Almighty God alive, as we've been told, He does not allow a total people to fall under oppression and become disrupted or dysfunctional. There's always a group that He utilizes because He tells us that the many, for various reasons, the many don't know. But you do have from among that group that Allah has favored with His mercy, those who are knowledgeable enough, and as previous scripture says, to whom much is given, much is required. And I'll stop with that.
Yeah, I like what you say. I think now I don't know if you know or not, but the young lady who did the study is an African American woman from Milwaukee, and she grew up in one of those families in a working class neighborhood of Milwaukee.
Yes,
So she was also speaking anecdotally about what she saw and what she heard and what
yeah,
she dealt with as a child,
I
right?
caught that. But
Yeah,
anecdotes don't belie the
I,
statistics.
I understand that, but she went and did the study on the stats,
I
which
heard
is
that too.
was
I heard that
the
as well.
basis of her PhD. And one of the problems that I have sometimes is when one of us, because she's not white, not Asian, not Hispanic, when one of us goes and does the work like she did, and I know how much work it takes to get your PhD because I saw my son labor through it. When they do the work, don't challenge them unless you're coming with something that can challenge them on that level. Somebody
But
who's
that
done the work.
that, that was my point. Blackstatistics.com are black folks that do statistical analysis.
And
That's why I
you're
raised
saying
that's why I
it's peer
raised it.
reviewed. And would it be different than what she said? That
Yes.
almost 50% of African Americans are in two parent families these days.
No, not that report. No, no, I'm looking at in terms of it's like a stalking horse situation or moving the goalposts. The issue
Well, okay, but who's moving the goalpost?
when you transfer the conversation to bring statistical analysis of Caucasians being worse off, I think that's moving the goalposts in terms of it. Go ahead.
No, she didn't say they were worse off. What she said was is that African American children who are in one parent families have often have better outcomes than white children in one parent families.
That was my point. Yes.
And I can absolutely positively see that, though it's only anecdotal because I haven't done the research. I've just
Yes.
seen the people.
Yes.
And having grown up in African American communities and spent most of my life around African American people, African Americans who grow up in single parent households, unless that household is a ticking time bomb from drug abuse, alcoholism, prostitution, drug dealing out of the house, all that kind of stuff. If there's any kind of a bottom at all to that mother, or in the cases where it's a single father raising children, if there's an extended family to help them, there's some great successes that come out of that. And also just some really solid people that never get in the stats because they graduated from high school and they went to work at a factory or they went to work at a warehouse. And 10 years later, with a high school education, they're a manager at a warehouse. We don't get that information sent back to us because people don't study African American success.
Well,
They
that's
study
why
African American failure.
that's why I mentioned Black statistics, because it does mention the successes, and it
Okay.
includes it also includes a distinction between uh, single parent family mother and single parent family father, and
Mm-hmm.
the outcomes of both. And also, here's something another factor: the American urban urban centers, or I should say, the urban neighborhoods, has changed because more industrious and more favored educationally and so forth, culturally, black uh, families have moved out where segregation had us all together. The the more equipped African Americans have moved out of those neighborhoods, no
Mm-hmm.
longer segregated. That's an issue that we have to look at, and what happened, what took place when that took place, and how.
But also, Michael, I think you got to look at the migration pattern. So back in the day, when a lot of my relatives left Texas and Louisiana and migrated north, man, they migrated where they could come over to each other's house on the weekend. They didn't separate by large distances from each other. I had cousins go to Racine, Wisconsin to work in the automobile industry up there. And then, man, there's like 15 of them that went up there. Yeah, they moved out of Texas. They moved away from the old homestead, but they were still within shouting distance of each other. My cousins here in Dallas Fort Worth area, who were in a section of Dallas called Oak Cliff. When they became middle class and started making money, they moved out of the old neighborhood. But the neighborhoods, the places they moved into, like the city called DeSoto and Lancaster and Cedar Hill, they're right next door to each other. They go over to each other's house every day as if they were still living in the same neighborhood. And I know some of us move farther away, and some of us want to move out there where we say, we're the only black people out here, and all that kind of stuff. Most African American people, when they can move out of the old neighborhood to a new neighborhood, are still looking to be around other successful African American people because they want to take that culture, the things that they like to do, the barbecues and all that stuff. They want to be comfortable doing that where they live.
But what
They don't
does
want to
my
have.
see, my question is, what does the black data say? I know you've got uh, uh, personal anecdotal information that personally happened personally, but that's a
Mhm.
very small subset of the bigger picture.
We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. And
Well,
again, I know that I'm only looking at places that I've lived, like
that's my
Dallas,
point. That's my
right?
point.
I
What
don't know
does
New York and Philadelphia. I don't know what they're doing.
pull up the statistics? There are black statistics on these things.
I
Pull it up.
know. I will. Okay, I'm going to do it, and next Thursday we'll talk about this a little bit more because I have an idea that when African Americans in Philadelphia move out of the ghetto or lower income places, when they move, they end up around a bunch of other African Americans who did the same thing they did.
Okay,
Because
but
that's how they get the word passes. Man, you need to
well,
come out here. They got nice houses, the schools are nice. You know, we got in our house, such and such with so much down payment. People talk and people want to be comfortable when they do move. And I'm not saying that's everybody. I just think that when I drive through, say, sections of Atlanta, or even when I'm out in a scarcely populated Black city, San Diego, where my son lives, when I go, if I want to go find African Americans, even there, the professionals, I know where to go.
well, that's
Because
my
even when
point. That's my point.
they're still living around each other, though.
Yeah,
African
but
Americans are still
that's my
together.
point. Well, but it's a class situation that I'm pointing to. When those who lived amongst the less equipped African Americans, the less equipped benefited. When they moved out, they lost the benefit, is my point.
Okay, there's something to be said for that if those individuals who moved are not professionals that have an opportunity to go and give back. If you're moving and taking everything and there's nothing for you to give back, like a teacher who moves to a better living situation, but he or she comes back and still teaches at that neighborhood school where they have been for the last 15 years. They're
Okay.
still interacting with those children every day.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my point, Michael, is I don't think anybody, and I will check out the site that you said. I just don't think anybody spends enough time really focused on African Americans. It is really hard to find peer-reviewed studies on African Americans, and especially, as Sister Manera said, we need to do work that's done by African Americans.
Yeah. It's there. It's out there.
Okay.
Sister Manera, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Can you can you switch us over? Stop
Yes.
the
Yes, it is. It
the
is
YouTube.
definitely time for Not Just Talk with Michael Hameen,
And
one of
let
the
me
best
know
programs on the air.
no, yeah, you do me a great service by coming being the forerunner. You know, you do me a great service. I love it, man. I tell you.
It's like Michael. That's like being in warfare and telling me to go take